The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Tocks Island Dam project was surrounded in controversy and dispute. The proposal came in 1965 and called for the damming of the Delaware River at the Pennsylvania-New Jersey border. The dam would create a lake which would serve the purpose of water supply and recreational use. Ultimately, the project would consume over 70,000 acres of residential area and farmland, including an entire Pennsylvania town. So join us on a journey upstream, where we take a look back upon the Tocks Island Dam project and the people who stood against it. The Tocks Island Dam was a huge multi-purpose reservoir project proposed for the Delaware River 6 miles upstream of the famous Delaware Water Gap. The dam would have created a 40-mile-long lake with depths up to 140 feet. Almost 250 billion gallons of water were to be stored behind the dam, with ample dry storage for floodwaters. The project was to be the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers' 8th largest U.S. dam project, and its largest east of the Mississippi River. The Tocks Island National Recreation Area, later the Delaware Water Gap National Recreation Area, was proposed specifically to develop the recreation opportunities created by the dam. There are 2 reasons that the river remained undammed to this point in spite of the intense demand for its water. The first was the existence of a Pennsylvania and New Jersey anti-dam treaty. This was signed in 1783 in order to keep the river open for lumber rafts. It was still in the books when hydropower generation became feasible. As a result, power dams were kept off the river. The second reason is that by 1920, the 3 states that shared the non-tidal Delaware, New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, had decided that the Delaware River was going to be developed as a water supply river and only tangentially for hydropower. The record August 1955 flood killed 200 people in the eastern United States, including about 100 people within the Delaware River basin.
When Hurricane Diane hit this area, the river had already been swollen. Tributaries swelled, causing the river to swell over its banks, and then it raced downstream.
Property damage in the 13 states affected by the flooding was extensive, with about 1/5 of the damage occurring in the Delaware Valley.
River View, they called it. And he had 3 cabins there, and I saw one of them that sat there and floated and bobbed around a little bit. Pretty soon it made a couple turns and went down the river.
You live in the floodplain, the river owns your house.
What the flood of 1955 did was open the doors to federal involvement in the Delaware River Basin water affairs. Until the flood, the federal government was not particularly welcome, nor was there a federal justification for the dam project, but now there was potential flood control benefits.
People were upset in this valley. Hey, we got to control the river with a dam.
In response to the flood, the Corps of Engineers initiated a large, basin-wide comprehensive planning effort in 1956, the first of its kind in the United States. This was completed in 1961 and authorized by Congress in 1962 as part of a huge national water resources bill.
This was a dam that would back water up 40 miles to Port Jervis. The elevation at Tri-States Rock is easy to remember. It's like a shotgun, 410 feet.
In addition to flood control, the project also intended to yield other benefits. The first of which was the recreation it provided on both the lake and in the surrounding areas, which included hunting, fishing, and hiking.
It would provide unique recreational opportunities. Boating, fishing.
Secondly, the water from the reservoirs was to be piped to 2 major surrounding cities, Philadelphia and New York.
They were going to pipe all the water over to a plain. Sunfish Pond, Catfish Pond, a lot of those big ponds up there were going to actually be reservoirs, holding the water to be piped into the city.
Lastly, the dam would encompass a state-of-the-art electrical powering facility, which utilized hydropower. On paper, the project seemed ideal. It wasn't until it was unveiled to the public and land acquisition began that the negative consequences were exposed. Among these was the geology at the site of the proposed earthen dam.
It's an earthen dam, which is not unusual. To get to the core of the dam and so forth, they had to do testing. It will never be built because of the geologic formations. Not solid enough, not stable enough.
Another consequence of the project was its financial burden it placed upon the United States at the height of the Vietnam War.
Remember, this is 1965. The Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, 1964, we're starting to build up. So you're looking at $60 million or better. A lot of money, but you're fighting a war now, Southeast Asia. So things are changing. Money has to be reallocated to different causes.
A final negative consequence was the land acquisition and the means by which the land was being acquired.
This guy, he'd come along and he would make you one offer, and then if you didn't accept it, he'd come back with a counter offer, or you had to make a counter offer. And then after two, that's all they wanted to give you, and the third time you'd have to go to court.
Initially, the Tocks Island Dam project was to consume 23,000 acres of land. The surrounding proposed recreation area added another 47,000 acres. The amount of private property needed to be acquired by the federal government for purely recreational uses was unprecedented in U.S. history. The government seized homes and private property of local residents for monetary compensation. Residents who did not accept the government's stingy offers had their homes or properties condemned.
That was just not the way. It didn't make people feel warm and fuzzy at all. And so people around here hated the U.S. government.
It was only a matter of time before the community rose up and took a stand against the government and the project. Two prominent local residents in particular started to organize, Nancy Shakaitis and Ruth Jones.
Nancy Shakaitis' farm sat right down here off River Road. It's the old Michaels farm. The Michaels, very prominent family, early settlers in the 18th century here. They'd been on that property for 200 years or better. Ruth Jones, who is the owner and runs the Kittatinny Canoe Outfit. Our visitor center, the Kittatinny Point Visitor Center, was Ruth Jones's restaurant, and her family owned that. She lived pretty close by in New Jersey. She was one of the first to go.
Nancy Shakaitis, Ruth Jones, and other members of the community formed the Delaware Valley Conservation Association in 1965. This group was opposed to the dam and the National Recreation Area from the very beginning.
They pulled together and said, well, wait a minute. But they did it the right way. I mean, it was a grassroots movement.
So the U.S. Marshal came in and he shoved the papers in my hand and told me what they were for. And we just stood there in silence, and then I heard this noise, and I looked beside me, and my daughter, who was the youngest, stood there, and the tears were rolling down her cheeks. She was crying because she didn't want to leave our family house. And I looked at Julie, and I got so angry. And I'm German. My father was a German immigrant. And I got my German temper up. I took those papers, and I shoved them back in the hands of that U.S. Marshal. I says, you take these papers and tell Pete DeGelke to shove them up his ass. Now you get the hell out of here. Those are my exact words. And I screamed them at him. His eyes got real big. He didn't know what to say. He just turned around, walked out the screen door, got in his car, and left. My husband says, you shouldn't have said that. I says, the hell I shouldn't have. But if my little daughter wouldn't have stand there sobbing quietly and I didn't hear it, I wouldn't have been triggered into getting so angry. And guess what? I called their bluff and they just left us alone. We finished our house and we moved the end of August into our house before school started like we planned. We had a friend from East Stroudsburg, Nancy Shakaitis, and her and my late husband, Frank Jones, really got together and got a big organization to fight it. And our theme was Nix on Tocks.
Nancy Shakaitis was actually able to bring this to the forefront by going to some of the Senate hearings.
The whole project was absolutely wrong, so that's why we fought it. President Johnson signed the bill for the project on September 1st, 1965. And that very same day, my father passed away. But he passed away thinking that his family would be able to continue with our flourishing business. Well, not so. We put people on the river on canoe trips and invited media to show them what a beautiful river it was and why you shouldn't dam it up. And because we were such a main opponent of the dam, that's why the Corps of Engineers condemned our place first. They wanted to set an example of what happens when you fight the Corps of Engineers.
Justice William O. Douglas had married a pretty young thing. She was kind of a crusader at that time in the 60s. And so she went up there with him, and they hiked up to Sunfish Pond. Well, it was that famous hike and all the news media that followed that actually caused a big fervor about doing this project.
On July 31st, 1975, the Delaware River Basin Commission voted 3-1 against the immediate construction of the Tocks Island Dam. Delaware, New Jersey, and New York voted against it. The federal government abstained, and Pennsylvania was the only state to vote for it. Support for the dam arose during the 80s, but in 1992 the project was officially deauthorized by Congress. The land, now in the hands of the National Park Service, was to remain as a preserved national recreation area.
It coalesced into the environmental movement. When was the first Earth Day? 1970? Yeah.
It was a great victory to stop that dam and keep this as one of the few rivers, the longest river in the east, without a major stem dam.
I am glad that the Park Service has the valley to keep it natural, or it would have been so commercialized and so unnatural. It wouldn't have been as pristine and beautiful as it is now.
The Tocks Island Dam project had been defeated. Geological problems, unforeseen costs, and the national war debt contributed to the project's demise. But it was the initial opposition from the community that catalyzed a nationwide resistance to keep the Delaware River undammed. Due largely in part to their perseverance, local residents can now enjoy the luxury of a preserved, scenic recreation area. Though not fully successful in their original intentions to stop the Tocks Island Dam project, the stand against the government prevented this 70,000-acre area of land from being submerged in water, and furthermore, sparked an environmental revolution.